Happy holidays and welcome to this episode of the Brandsight podcast. I'm here with Matt Serlin, and today we're going to be talking about some of the biggest domain name news stories from 2017. And to get started, let's talk about what those are. The first one that I'd like to cover is around the fact that there's been a tremendous amount of activity around mergers and acquisitions in the domain name space. Obviously, we had the divestiture of Mark Monitor as part of TR's IP and Science. They were acquired by Onyx and Bering. We also had an investment from Vespa into Cum Laude and Valideus. Of course, there was also the acquisition of Brightside by Donut. So a lot of activity. I think, it extends, a little bit beyond into sort of tertiary kinds of companies, really around legal tech. We saw also acquisitions of Core Search, which had formerly been a part of Wolters Kluwer. We saw the merger of Anaqua with LaCorpio. There's lots of interest from private equity and the financial markets, I think, in sort of legal technology. And I think one of the reasons for that is because and I really see sort of legal tech and, and domain management and trademark management and brand protection even all being, really core to sort of what legal does. And there's been so much interest in legal, like I was saying, because I think that this is one area where, we haven't had a lot of, technology in there today. And this is sort of the last part of the corporation where, we can really see sort of legal enterprise management, sort of ERP for legal. And I think that the financial markets and private equity see that there's a lot of potential for growth. And I think that's why we're seeing so much activity. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about the domain market in general and what's going on there.
Yeah, so specific to the domain market, I think if we look really at the use of new GTLDs, which, it's funny, we keep calling them new GTLDs, but we're now several years after the launch of many of the new GTLDs. And so if you look at the numbers, the numbers dipped a little bit. And so, we hit a peak of close to 30 million names, just specific to new GTLD registrations. And now we're, down under 25 million. And so, I think people are still definitely interested in the new TLDs. I think they're being a little bit more careful about what they're renewing. And so certainly from a investment standpoint, and we've seen a lot of speculation, obviously, in the new GTLD market, I think folks, when it comes up on that, now second year renewal, people are being a little bit more selective about what they're renewing. I think corporations specifically continue to keep those names from a defensive purpose, just as they do, their broader portfolios. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that trend continues if the market, the new GTLD market specifically, continues to sort of tread water, or if we see a little bit of an increase in the coming year. That will definitely be interesting to look at. The other thing that we always talk about is the use of .brands, and that was another thing that jumped out to me in 2017. I think the first year for me, at least, in seeing a .brand used in more sort of general marketing and general use. I've seen billboards now with .brands. I've seen .brands at airports, right? And so, I think we'll continue to certainly see momentum there, more use around .brands. As we've said for many years, if you were a company that made the investment to secure your .brand, you're really going to at some point need to take advantage of it. And while there are companies that have switched their entire sort of online presence over to a .brand, we think that's a much slower adoption rate. But certainly when we see things like specific marketing campaigns, product promotions, things like that, I think definitely you're going to continue to see more .brands active in the space. You'll see, I anticipate seeing more billboards, commercials, things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see how that continues to move as we move into 2018 here pretty soon. So one of the other ones that we also wanted to talk about was greater representation of intellectual property interests at ICANN, and certainly with the appointment of Sarah Deutsch, and we've talked about it previously, both Sarah being appointed to the ICANN board, and also Heather Forrest is now the chair of the GNSO. I don't think there's been a time in recent memory where we've had such strong representation of folks familiar with intellectual property interests. And so I think that's a really good sign. It's an important step. It's good for, I've always thought that it was important for the board and the GNSO to have folks that had real life practical experience in these matters. And for us, certainly intellectual property and all of the things that come with it is definitely a key focus. So I think that was an important development.
Agreed. I mean, I think the face of ICANN, especially with new GTLDs, has changed significantly. I think when we first started attending, there were a lot of people from civil society, from, obviously the contracted parties sort of ruled, right? The registries and the registrars, but you had a lot of these interests that were not necessarily coming from business. But now with the new GTLD program, we see all sorts of businesses there. And I think that has made quite a difference, even in the way the meetings are conducted, to be honest. But I think the biggest sort of news story or item in the domain world for this last year undoubtedly has to be around GDPR and WHOIS. WHOIS seems to come and go year after year. Sometimes it's a hot topic, sometimes, we're waiting on reports. Sometimes we're talking about making big changes. But this year, I think we're finally at a point where, okay, something is going to happen, because the GDPR, which is the EU's new privacy regulation, which is coming into force next year, will happen. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's happening. And registries and registrars will need to comply. They are complying. They are right now in the process of making plans for how they will modify WHOIS and how they will ensure that they are not in violation of the GDPR, even if that may mean they're not necessarily compliant with ICANN. Now, ICANN has said that they will help the registries and registrars understand whether or not their plans will be compliant with the contracts that they have signed with ICANN. But as you can imagine, that's going to be a pretty major undertaking. I'm not even sure how ICANN compliance can respond to all those inquiries about whether or not what is being developed will comply. So, I think going into the last ICANN meeting, I was hopeful that we would get some actual guidance from ICANN, but that is not the case. ICANN has pretty clearly said that, any new policy or any new approach will have to come from the community. So I think, we're in a place where we're going to see all different WHOIS formats, all different approaches, where getting access to WHOIS is going to be much more complicated in the coming months and coming years. So I think stay tuned, and I think everyone should just be ready for that. So I guess the question is, what will 2018 bring us?
So yeah, let's get our crystal ball out now. Certainly, as Elisa just touched on, I do think how this whole GDPR landscape shakes out will be interesting to see. And again, that will go into force in May. And so, registries and registrars essentially have, less than 6 months at this point to come up with their plans, to roll them out, to, see if they're compliant with ICANN. And so it would be very interesting to certainly see how that plays out. So that's one thing. The other thing that I don't know that too many people are aware of, and it actually just popped into my head recently, is that we have the .com contract comes up for renewal in November of 2018. And of course, VeriSign has run .com since its inception, and I imagine they will continue to do so. But the terms of that agreement and things like price increases are always interesting to watch as part of that agreement. And so that'll come in November. That will be something that I personally think will be interesting to look at. So I guess my crystal ball isn't really that crystal, because those are two things that are certain to happen. So my predictions are pretty much set in stone. But Elisa, maybe you have some.
Okay, I'll do my crystal ball gazing will be a little bit more
speculative.
Yeah. So, I think we'll continue to see some additional brands making use of their, they're not even newly acquired anymore. They've had them for quite some time, but I think we'll continue to see brands using their TLDs, and I think we'll start seeing them in some campaigns, additional campaigns. As Matt mentioned, we've seen them in some. I think the other thing, we'll continue to see M&A activity around sort of the domain market and legal tech, brand protection. I think we'll continue to see more activity there. So I think those are two areas where I suspect I'll, hopefully next year be talking about what has happened and how we've especially seen some improvements with the adoption and use of brands. But of course, I've been so wrong before in the past, so I guess we'll just wait and see. I think that brings us to the end of our podcast. Again, happy holidays to everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays and happy new year, and we will talk to you again all next year. Thank you.
See you soon.